Welcome to the Modern Classrooms Project podcast. Each week, we bring you discussions with educators on how they use blended, self-paced, and mastery-based learning to better serve their students. We believe teachers learn best from each other, so this is our way of lifting up the voices of leaders and innovators in our community. This is the Modern Classrooms Project podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Modern Classrooms Project podcast. My name is Tony Rose Deanna, they, them pronouns, a designated hype person here at Modern Classrooms. And I am joined by Kim Weaver, she, her pronouns, a former classroom teacher and current STEM and EdTech coordinator for the Olympic Educational Service District in Northwestern Washington State, and Erin Lukehart, an instructional technology coordinator and future Educator Academy co-teacher for Charlevoix-Emmett Intermediate School District. I hope I said that correctly, Erin, because I was looking at that spelling and I was like, oh my.
It's not what it sounds. It's Charlevoix, but all good. Yeah.
Charlevoix. But welcome, Kim and Erin. Thank you so much for being in this space with me and saying yes to the podcast.
Sometimes teachers walk into a situation and content maybe isn't feeling super relevant. It's not connected to their day-to-day. And yet that's the expectation that they sit and, be good listeners, think about application. And I think even with the best of intent, sometimes it just misses the mark. And we think about, again, kind of that, like, what do we want our classrooms to look like? How do we support all the learners in our classroom? And we've got this tension because when we're coming to a professional learning opportunity, that doesn't seem to be the experience. For the most part, I think there are spaces where that's happening and that's super exciting, but for the most part, it seems to be kind of that one size fits all. So I think certainly, when you think about professional goals that teachers have, things that they're working toward in their classroom, they're not always met with learning opportunities that help them build that skill set or reflect on what's going well or what they could improve as well.
Definitely. I think that relevance issue, when you have 1,000 other fires that you're trying to put out, I think it can be really difficult to, elevate professional development with that. This is relevant and important to me right now. Time is our most precious non-renewable resource, whether it's in the classroom when we're teaching our learners or whether it's in professional development. And I think a lot of times, in both scenarios, whether we're teaching students or whether we're working with teachers in professional development, we get into this box checking mode. I covered that. I covered this year's schedule. I covered how to access your learning management system. I covered this. I covered that. We get into this box checking mentality, not out of any malice, just because time is so short. So I think that's the biggest pitfall, is trying to cram so many things into such a limited time and failing to surface that relevance. Relevance is right in there. Choice is there. Joy is mentioned in the latest version of the UDL guidelines. Where are we finding joy in our learning and in our collective experience of what it means to learn? And that is how I think about professional development. I always have the UDL guidelines up, and I think if it takes longer and we cover or do less content, but the teachers have that relevance and joy and choice, that is okay with me. The thing that you have to, I think, say goodbye to is the idea that you are going to cover it all in the time allowed, and to instead prioritize those UDL guidelines, and teachers will feel what it is like to sit in a classroom where that is a priority. And I think it's really difficult as an educator to experience that really good learning environment and then turn your back on it and say, oh no, I'm going to go back to fully lecturing, just talking at my students, doing education to them, not for them or with them. I think it's very difficult to go back once you've seen a universally designed educational experience from a learner's standpoint.
I would just add that I think that modeling is such an important aspect in our professional learning. And sometimes I think about professional learning as kind of like this parallel path where we've got our content aim, like what is it that we're working on and hoping that teachers get out of this at the end. But also when we think about the design of it, it's like, how can we help expose them to something as a learner through that perspective? And so, with whether it's thinking about UDL, whether it's thinking about like the MCP framework, whatever kind of new learning strategies we're thinking about, how do we model those so that teachers not only think about the content, but also then can go like, I really appreciated it when Kim set it up this way. Like she just said, how can I bring this back into my classroom for my students? Because I know for me as a learner, I valued that.
Something that we get the most positive feedback on is, I'm a second grade teacher, and if I'm paired with a, AP calculus teacher in a breakout room, we don't have as much to talk about. So I think behind the scenes, what my co-facilitators and I really did was try to get to know our participants so that when we came to those live sessions, we could help support their own relevance by putting them with people like them. So I really think that was something we've offered it twice, and we'll be doing it again this coming year. If you're a teacher in Washington State, look us up, find our blended learning resource study. And I think another reason why it was successful is just because it's such a great foundational text. And if those of you hearing this podcast before for the first time haven't heard of the Shift to Student Led, check it out. I think it really bridges the gap between Modern Classroom Project and the 3 pillars, and okay, what do I do to take one step towards it? I think sometimes the Modern Classroom shift can seem so big, but I think that the Shift to Student Led book really helps educators say, okay, I can take this one step and then another and another and another.
When you look at like Rob's book, Meet Every Learner's Needs, and we're thinking about a kindergarten or a first grade teacher, they're not maybe going to implement the model in its entirety, but they're thinking about instructional videos and how that could support families and school to family engagement. And they're really excited about those chapters. They can dive deeper and start to create things and work on slides that will be the baseline of their videos. So just honoring them as professionals, knowing that their lives are busy outside of just work, but also letting them dive into things that feel really, really meaningful and beneficial for their classroom too.
Oh, I bet your educators are so happy to have you both.
I hope so.
Right. I mean, you just said it, Erin, right? Like honoring them as professionals, because I think a lot of the times, especially with society and how society views educators, right? We don't often get the respect, first of all. And then we often don't get the autonomy to move how we want to move. And then so much pressure to perform the way that we want them to perform, right? And so the piece of honoring them as professionals and understanding that life is busy for everyone, our students, our stakeholders, our educators, and having the lesson classification of must do, should do, aspire to do, like you said, allows for that flexibility and capacity, checking your capacity.
It's about thinking creatively about what does this look like for adults? What does this look like on a learning management system? So that by the time we reach our first live session, we already kind of feel like we have a bit of a community. And I think that's something. Teaching can be a very isolating profession, and fostering that sense of, oh, these educators are going through the same challenges I am. They teach a similar role as me. And so that's what I think keeps people coming back, is that sense of community and that we really are all traveling it together. But then also I just want to talk about prior knowledge, which is another thing that's on the UDL chart, and honoring that expertise. We, as a profession in the past, have done a really bad job of surfacing teachers' prior knowledge and their own expertise and what they're bringing, and giving people the opportunity to do that with their job-alike colleagues, I think, is something that is rare and very valued by the participants.
I have a lot of small districts where you are the middle and high school social studies department, or you teach all middle school math. So for me, kind of creating like those spaces of community or getting to know who are the other teachers in our region that are in those similar roles and connecting them, whether that's like through email, whether it's through a small in-person meetups to share, I think is really powerful. And again, that's sometimes the recognition I think people need to like keep going. Like, hey, I see you. I see the effort that you're putting in. I know that this is hard work and it's worth sharing because it's so cool. One of my favorite things to do locally when we can make it happen is to get teachers into the classroom where that's happening. So we have an awesome third grade teacher locally. Shout out to Nikki. She's a mentor and an implementer. But when teachers are thinking about, I'm kind of curious about this modern classroom thing, but what does it look like? I always encourage them to go visit her classroom and see what it looks like and talk to her students. So wherever I think we can do that too is so helpful.
One of the ways that I think makes a shift in participants' minds in professional development is asking for an artifact, whether that's a student work or a pacing tracker or a mastery check or something from their class. What is an artifact of this change in practice or change in thinking that we're trying to get? And so that implementation piece, and for the self-pacing, the pre-work might be, okay, understanding concepts, understanding strategies, live session, come together and talk about it. And then that follow-up piece, again, earn more clock hours. We all need the clock hours to renew our cert. So if you do come back and provide, okay, I tried this and here's my artifact, then that is additional clock hours that you're earning. And so this word artifact seems to trigger something in teachers' minds that, okay, I actually have to do it. I have to actually make something. It's not just all happening in my brain. It's actually happening in my classroom. And that has been something, it's great to see what teachers are creating.
It's important maybe to have some conversations amongst like staff and leadership about how this might look different, right? It might not be our hour and a half after school PD meeting that we all come in and we all sit down. That's probably an important conversation to have with everybody. And also, sometimes there's like contractual pieces that have to be met. One of the districts that I support does a flex PD where teachers get to dive in. It's part of their contract. And for 13 hours, they're diving into something that is meaningful and relevant to them for their PD. So, thinking through what are some creative ways that you might be able to work within the system, but also provide that flexibility and choice so that learning feels more meaningful and relevant. That's probably one of those earlier conversations. If you can't do that, then how do you work within that? We have an hour and a half. Now let's think about some personalization. Maybe we can have a couple of different learning pathways. There's that lesson classification that can be brought in too. But understanding like what are those constraints and what's flexible and what's not so flexible, I think is a great place to start.
Thank you so much for listening. You can find links to topics and tools we discussed in our show notes for this episode. And remember, you can learn more about our work at www.modernclassrooms.org, and you can learn the essentials of our model through our free course at learn.modernclassrooms.org. You can follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at modernclassproj, that's Proj. We are so appreciative of all you do for students and schools. Have a great week, and we'll be back next Sunday with another episode of the Modern Classrooms Project podcast.